So, Andrew, we've been very busy kicking off this landmark second season of God versus God, venturing as we have into ancient Egypt. So I don't know how much time you have, to read the papers these days. It seems we've heard a lot about artificial intelligence lately. Now, I thought it might be a good tool for us to help support our cause, achieve our mission, determine which gods are best suited to save us from our troubled times. So before we got this episode together, I pulled up the old Chat GPT and gave the very question that you and I posed in season 1 of this program. And I said, if all the Greco-Roman gods were to get into a fight with one another, who would ultimately win? Now, I'll be honest, if this Chat GPT had just spat out our final champion in 3 seconds, I would have felt a little awkward that we spent so much time making that determination last year.
Yes.
So thankfully, it did not. Instead, it responded in a somewhat wooden fashion, and I'm quoting here. As an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions, beliefs, or preferences, but I can provide information about the power dynamics and abilities of the gods as described in mythology. Yeah, thanks a lot, buddy. We can do that. We've got that part covered. So, not terribly insightful, but the ending of its response did cause me to raise an eyebrow, I guess. It said, and again, I'm quoting, ultimately, it's difficult to say which god would win in a fight, as much would depend on the circumstances of the battle and the alliances that might form between the gods. It's possible that a lesser known or less powerful god could surprise everyone and come out on top. End of quote.
Wow.
So in that sense, I think it was kind of perceptive, I have to admit.
Yeah.
This, unthinking, unfeeling robot might be onto something. So I couldn't resist going a little bit further. So I did ask about our previous episode, season 2, episode 1. And just wondered whether Ra or Hather would be victorious. Now, of course, once again, ChatGPT dodged the question, but there's another notable conclusion in its response. Quote, it's worth noting that the ancient Egyptians did not necessarily see their gods as being in competition with one another, but rather as complementary figures who each held important roles in maintaining the balance of the world. Therefore, it may not be accurate to compare Ra and Hather in terms of power, as they represented different aspects of life and the cosmos. End of quote.
Wow.
Now, first of all, the gall that to suggest we're asking the wrong question. I was fairly offended by that. And
that's just a dodge.
Exactly. You should have stayed on that.
Right.
But the suggestion that this podcast is in any way not accurate, that is frankly stunning, and perhaps proof of how much progress AI really has to make before it gets to the big time. So,
no doubt.
I do not doubt the notion of Egyptian gods being complementary figures rather than competitors. You pointed that out in our season premiere. I think that's true. But I mean, come on. We're not about to change from God versus God to, God, another God maintaining harmonic balance.
Right. Well, I think some of the stories in this episode may undercut the AI point.
I think that's right. That's correct. At least the episode 2 we're about to enjoy as anything but harmonic balance.
Right.
So we will see that. So I think that'd be too boring. So, thank you, Mr. Chatbot. Appreciate it. But good try. Hopefully when your big brother GPT-4 is released, you'll have something a little bit more useful to contribute. But, on the plus side, until then, Andrew, further proof that you and I continue to provide an essential service that even the most newfangled technology just fails to duplicate.
All right.
So anything to add before we jump in to our episode?
No, I think you've taken us in a strange new direction.
Great. Well, it's only about to get stranger.
Okay.
Well, then let's dive in. So here we are, God versus God, season 2, episode 2, Osiris versus Tefnut. And as always, may the best God win.
Yes.
We're going to start with Osiris. So Lord of the Dead and Rebirth, both of those things at once. Now, the primary focus is that connection between life and death, the big stuff, including the afterlife and resurrection. We'll hear about that. But it's only the beginning, because this is, as Egyptian gods tend to have a few sort of divine side hustles, Osiris is also the god of fertility, agriculture, and vegetation. So he's walking that fine line between existential human destiny and broccoli, I guess, the middle ground there. Spelt, pharaoh, I don't know. So I'm going to show you, as we did last week, I'm going to show you an image of Osiris, and then I would like for you to describe for our listeners what you see. Again, taking advantage of our audio-only format.
Right, yes.
So
full advantage.
That's right. So I'm going to share, and this is the god Osiris. So why don't you just tell the listeners what you see. Give us the description, and I'll comment back on what you've observed.
All right, so we have a man here, and it's his face is green, as are his hands. He's dressed in all white.
Yes.
He's got that familiar Egyptian pose where the shoulders are facing us, but have a profile of the face.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a kind of a conical hat, a little bit of a Pope-ish looking hat.
Right.
And he's holding two different objects in his hands. One looks like a hook.
Yes.
And one maybe a feather duster or some sort of, it's a stick with some, I believe they're feathers coming off it, but I'm not sure. Some tassels, perhaps. He's got a striking red belt, and standing on a little podium. This is maybe a little height challenged.
Yeah, and look at the size of those feet. I mean, this isn't going to come up in any of the rest of the episode, but he's got some serious feet on him.
So. The proportions. Yeah, he's that's
very very well observed. So I think you hit all the fine points, Andrew, and I'll kind of talk you through. So you mentioned the green skin.
Yep.
For the Egyptians, that is the color of rebirth. Makes perfect sense given how vegetation comes back to life. So he's most commonly depicted with that nice green hue. You mentioned the white garments. So that, of course, is mummy form. That is we'll learn the first instance of being mummified and wrapped in linens. It did make him something of a fashion trailblazer back in the Egyptian world. We're gonna hear there was a very good reason why that he needed to wear that. Usually he's seen, we see him here kind of from the top of the chest down in that sort of mummy form. Sometimes it's even only from the waist down in some images. So it's more of like a kind of a summer mummy look, you wouldn't wear it after like Egyptian Labor Day, in whatever month of the Coptic calendar that would fall in. So we'll learn, not a fashion choice only, but had a very good practical reason for that. We'll get to that. You did not mention the pharaoh's beard. So he's got extending from the chin, this sort of maybe 6 or 7 inch long kind of chin beard with a slight curl, familiar to us now in these kinds of images. And I know you're probably asking yourself, well, Matt, weren't the Egyptians notoriously meticulous shavers? And that is true, they were. But the pharaohs were the exception with this extended chin beard. Okay. So once again, Osiris very much being a trailblazer, he was the first to rock this kind of what they call the pharaoh's beard. By many accounts, the pharaohs afterward, many of them would grow that out as an homage to Osiris. If they couldn't quite pull it off, they would just do a false one, make it out of metal or something. So that was their symbol that we are joined to Osiris from the very beginning. Also a gender blind custom. So there were female pharaohs, and they also rocked the sort of false pharaoh's beard, usually made of metal. Now, since Ancient Egypt, of course, this has fallen out of favor, apart from a brief exception of the band Linkin Park in the early 2000s, who brought it back for about a year. But since then, very much of its time.
Maybe we'll bring it back.
There you go.
With a new god.
If you can say nothing else about this show, it is all about being trendsetters. You mentioned the crown. Now that is called an Atef crown. Sort of, you mentioned it being almost a sort of papal, like proto-pope type crown. It was very distinctive, almost like a big white water bottle. It's got these sort of rainbow colored wings on the sides.
Yeah.
Those are actually 2 ostrich feathers. Now, very colorful, little flamboyant, maybe for my taste, but I suppose if you already got, green skin and like a half mummy look going, why not go all the way? Just take it to the limit. You pointed out the 2 objects, the crook and flail. So the crook, of course, is that sort of shepherd's hook that is used to guide the sheep. That is symbolic, of course, of his kingship. He is leading the flock. He is the leader of Egypt. The flail, which you thought may be a feather duster, he was not the god of housekeeping. So it was, in fact, a flail for 2 purposes. First, for fertility, because you could use that to thresh the grain. But you could also use it to symbolize your control. You could use it to whip people because it's still it was a weapon. So by holding these 2, the pharaoh is essentially saying, yes, I will be your leader, but if you get out of line, I will also not hesitate to issue some, I don't know the Egyptian word, but what we would call whoop ass, I think is the term. He's ready to do that. The belt, the red belt, I have no explanation for it. Maybe just to pop a color, to complete the outfit, to tie it all together. Maybe just to keep his mummy pants up, but that's all. But all together, it's quite a look. A lot of symbolism going on with Osiris. So well done. A little bit of lineage. So Osiris was really old school, from those first sort of 4 generations from the beginning. His father was Jeb, the god of the earth. His mother was Nut, god of the sky. Of course, their mother was Tefnut, whom you'll be discussing in the second segment of the program, which means we have one contestant in this episode competing against his own grandmother, which I believe is a first on this program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
so we're blazing some trails this time around.
Right.
So Osiris's parents, Jeb and Nut, they were the grandchildren of Ra, the sun god. And listeners will remember that from our previous episode. Osiris is the eldest son. He's got 4 siblings, and 2 of whom are very notable. So he's got his sister Isis, who also will become his wife, very old school, and his younger brother Set, who is the god of chaos. Now, both of them are going to factor into the myth of Osiris, which we'll hear about shortly. So let's get to the myth. Osiris was not, as I said, merely a god, but a god king, a ruler of the land, and very much beloved he was in Egypt. Had a really striking earthly form. He cut a very handsome figure. Of course, had that cool Lincoln Park chin beard, had the crazy ostrich headdress we talked about for added style points, but didn't just have the sort of outside ancient Egyptian panache. He also on the inside had real charm, real charisma. And maybe most importantly, he was recognized for having just this rare inner wisdom. From the beginning of his reign, Osiris, very savvy politician to come into the throne, had obviously, despite very royal, privileged upbringing, he believes in real reform from day one. So in a bold first move, the first day he becomes king, he outlaws cannibalism. So really comes out swinging politically.
Yeah, he's very, very progressive,
which apparently at the time was a bit of a problem. So
progress.
Guys, I know I'm new here, but we got to cool it with the whole eating each other thing. It's kind of barbaric, not very nutritious. Come on, we're better than this. So, but Osiris is not just an anti-cannibal crusader. He's a problem solver. He's a doer. So to replace the questionable dietary habits of his people, he guides them to the arable land. He blesses everybody who would grow their own bountiful harvests, and everybody does. So there begins his connection to fertility, agriculture, vegetation. He also brings this new level of culture to Egypt. So he goes on this voyage around the known world, heads to Europe, goes to the Near East, and brings home all the best in arts and culture back to Egypt. Also, to his credit, Osiris is a bit of a feminist. So when he leaves on his world tour, he puts Isis, his sister wife, in charge. And she holds down the fort and does a good job. It's hard to imagine this scenario in contemporary American politics where there's a president who just says, hey, guys, I'm headed overseas on a diplomatic mission, but while I'm away, I'm going to put Isis in charge.
No.
It wouldn't sound right. And the people would say, I don't know. The president says, no, it's fine. Isis is my wife. People say, okay, that sounds better. And the president says, and she's my sister. Well, maybe the other Isis may not be so bad.
Stop while you're ahead.
That's right. So King Osiris is away. Queen Isis is back home, does a perfectly good job upholding his high standard of virtue. But little does she know, there's a sinister plot underfoot to take out the king and seize the throne. It's being hatched by Set, who is the god of chaos, the younger brother of both Isis and Osiris. Now, Set is very jealous of his brother, the king. Sources differ a little bit on exactly why. So Plutarch tells us Set is jealous because, big brother has it all. He's got fortunes, the peaceful reign over Egypt. So he just covets the throne for himself.
Yeah.
And fair enough. It's sibling rivalry. We've seen plenty of it in our day. This podcast is certainly no stranger to it.
Sure.
Also remember, Set is the god of violent chaos and war. So of course, he's going to want to mix things up a bit. Also mention that Set bears a resemblance to multiple animals. So including the hyena, the jackal, the pig, and the fox. So he's just say he's an eye-catching fellow.
Yeah.
So sibling jealousy is Plutarch's explanation, but the pyramid texts, the ancient texts, have a different explanation for why Set is so angry at his older brother. According to that text, Set is upset at Osiris for sleeping with his wife, Nephthys. Now, Osiris, in truth, may have done this, but in his defense, Nephthys did pull a fast one on Osiris, assumed the form of his actual wife, Isis.
Oh.
It's said she maybe deployed a little bit of wine in the process and did a little switcho-changeo. So that sneaky union did lead to the birth of Anubis, who's this love child, and Set, who is, of course, the cuckold, didn't appreciate the whole thing. He was offended.
Yeah.
Now, again, keep in mind, these are both brothers who are married to their own sisters.
Yeah, they were both their sisters. Yeah,
there's not a ton of moral high ground to be had here, but as usual with these older generation folks, it's complicated. So, and you can picture Osiris kind of making his own excuse for the infidelity. He's like, hey man, I thought I was working it with the sister I married, not the other sister. So back off. In any case, for whatever the reason he's furious, Set is very upset at his older brother. So he sets out, if you will, to have his older brother killed in order to himself take over as pharaoh. So according to Plutarch, Set gets 72 accomplices to plot the assassination of Osiris. Nice. It's a big production.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it's hard to find that many willing conspirators. It takes a lot of work because people love King Osiris. He's a good king.
Right.
His approval ratings are off the charts. But he goes to the dark corners of Egypt. He finds 72 such men and gets to plotting. So here's the plot. It's just before his brother is about to come back home from his trip. Remember, he's backpacking around Europe. He's doing his royal gap year and whatever. He announces he's going to have a big welcome home party. He's going to invite all the upper crust of Egypt.
That's nice.
So the big day finally arrives. The guests are all there. King Osiris makes his triumphant return. There's food, there's wine. I suspect there's probably some of that Egyptian beer that we talked about. Set, as the host, reveals that he has planned a party game. Sounds great, right? He's the host and a kid creative, keep things moving. So he reveals this very unusual party favor. It is a coffin, but not just any coffin. It's been made from the highest quality materials in all of Egypt. And we'll recall from the last episode, Egyptians, they take their voyage to the afterlife very seriously. So when they see this coffin, they think that is one smooth ride to the hereafter. I want to get a piece of that. And Set makes this big announcement. That coffin will be a prize tonight for one lucky winner. So here's the deal. Every guest here gets to step inside the coffin and lay down. If and only if the coffin fits you perfectly, the coffin is yours. So everyone's excited. They all line up.
Oh, yeah, that's an old party game, sure.
Classic. I mean, everybody...
If the coffin fits.
Yeah, that's right. So everybody clamors to the front, gets in line, gives it a go, but wouldn't you know it, not one of the guests has just the right fit that they need to win. So in the end, King Osiris, of course, takes his turn, lays down, and wouldn't you know it, sure enough, he is the perfect fit. And he's lying down and he thinks to himself, it's almost like somebody made this coffin custom fit for me. And there is the sound of the shutting coffin. You guessed it. At that moment, Set, the god of chaos, springs forward, closes the coffin on his brother, immediately seals it with molten lead. And then he orders the coffin to be dumped into the Nile River, where his brother will be left to die a terrible death. So all happens in just a matter of a moment. Wow. So his goons come, they grab the coffin, dump it into the river. And just like that, Set becomes the new king of Egypt. Now, I do have a few thoughts on this plan. First of all, King Osiris clearly has terrible security around him.
Yes, yeah.
This is nowhere near the Secret Service. No. Also, not sure Set really needed 72 people to pull this off. I mean, maybe like 5 or 6 for the muscle, but I mean, who are the rest? Like the party planners, the
caterers,
valet parking for the camels, or I don't know. Maybe overstaffed it, but in any case, the plot works. King Set is now assumed control, begins his reign of chaos, while King Osiris is floating in this sealed coffin down the river. Now, understandably, Isis, who's now the former queen, very upset by this course of action. So she flees the palace, begins to search the river for her husband and his fancy coffin. Now, she is a goddess. She does have magical powers. So she may be able to heal him, but she's got to find him first.
Right.
And the Nile's a big river, so she's on the hunt for some time. And some say she runs into Anubis on her journey. That's the love child from the other affair, who's since been abandoned by his parents. And she raises him on her own, which is a class act, I thought. In the meantime, back in Egypt, the new king and god of chaos, really living up to his name. The King Set administration is total anarchy. He's undoing all the good work of his predecessor. It's reminiscent of America in early 2017. So back in the Nile, finally Isis eventually gets word that the coffin has been washed ashore in a small town outside of Egypt over in Phoenicia called Byblos. Now, the coffin is stuck inside a tamarisk tree, which has grown all the way around it. And depending who you ask, it has a very special fragrance to it. Some even say it glows, which really makes you wonder why they couldn't have found it sooner. But eventually they do find it. Isis has the coffin removed from this glowing tamarisk tree. Her husband Osiris is still inside, but his royal green color, of course, is faded to a sickly gray. And he's as good as dead. So but he's not quite dead. She
Oh.
uses her magic powers, not only heals her husband, but while she's on a roll, gets him to impregnate her.
Nice.
In a rare posthumous conception, which eventually will lead to the birth of Horus the Younger as the story continues.
Right.
I mean, for Osiris, a pretty amazing turn there. One minute he's in his coffin, good as dead, and the next minute he's enjoying a surprise conjugal visit. So worked out pretty well.
Right.
So word gets back around to Egypt. King Set, of course, is furious. Here's the whole development. He is understandably upset. The plot has gone awry. So he places an order in the kingdom. He says, as soon as Isis and Osiris set foot back on Egyptian soil, first of all, she's going to be arrested. And secondly, the big brother, the deposed king, well, he makes a demand to his goons. And he says, guys, do something about it. And I imagine their response was akin to that of Sean Connery in Michael Bay's 1995 film, The Rock.
Like what? Kill him again?
That's right. Set says, yes, kill him again. And this being ancient Egypt, that's the thing you can do. It's exactly what happens. So with the help of his goons, sure enough, Set violently does kill Osiris. Not only that, he has his corpse dismembered, cut into 14 pieces.
Yeah, you don't want to repeat.
That's right. He's got to learn his lesson. So takes the 14 pieces, has them dispersed to all different locations throughout Egypt so that Isis will not be able to find him again, or at least not find him in one piece.
Right.
Isis, however, is not deterred. She runs off, escapes arrest, and with the help of her sister Nephthys and her son Horus the Younger, goes on another quest, a great quest, even bigger than the first one, to hunt down all the body parts, except one. She's unable to recover her husband's phallus. Now, Set, as he was undertaking the dismemberment, he had cast the royal unit, I guess, into the depths of the Nile, where it was promptly eaten by fish. Now, there are some accounts that say Isis created a new member for him from a tree. Probably not the kind of wood he was hoping for. Other accounts, she just sort of magically grows a new one for him. In any case, she gathers up all the other pieces, wraps them again in linen cloth to hold everything together. So there's the reason he needs to become the first mummy, just to keep those pieces together. Osiris is then brought back to life for a second time, which is great, but he's just not the same after everything he's been through. So being king again, just out of the question. That ship has sailed.
Yeah. Right.
So he transitions to a post-retirement role, and he works in the underworld where he becomes the god and judge of the dead. Now, I'd say that's a pretty good second act. I mean, you hear about star athletes becoming broadcasters, ex-presidents who are setting up libraries or selling weird digital trading cards, whatever they do. This former king, he sets his own course, takes a deep breath, pulls up his mummy pants, secures his wooden wiener, and takes a new gig in the hereafter. So the story does continue a little bit. King Set ends up going after Isis and Horus the Younger to seek his revenge again for reanimating his older brother. We're going to save that for another episode. I'm sure that will come along down the road, so we won't spoil that. But needless to say, that reassembly of Osiris's body parts, that begins this custom of mummification, and really became that for not just pharaohs, but all the nobles who could afford it. They would be wrapped in linens. They would be buried facing the east where the sun would rise, so they could rise up and join the sun god Ra on his daily journey to and from the underworld, as you, Andrew, so eloquently described in episode 1.
Yep.
That was for the nobles who could afford it. If you were a commoner and could not afford it, they would essentially just leave your corpse out in the desert for 2 months. So it's a significant step down.
Yeah.
So again, the rich folks get the cool outfits made of fine Egyptian linen, and poor folks get left out in the sun to just become a human raisin. So the afterlife is the final chapter. That latter-day kingdom of Osiris was there, and we mentioned this in the last episode. The afterlife in ancient Egypt was really nice place. So this retirement job was vastly superior to like being a Walmart greeter, for instance. In the Egyptian afterlife, unlike Walmart, people had to meet a certain standard of quality to get in. So once you get there, after death, you face judgment from a tribunal of 42 divine judges. Again, I mean, nothing small. 72 assassins, 42 judges. The Egyptians, they go big. They don't mess around. And the judges posed the question to the recently deceased, and they asked, did you live your life in accordance with Maat? That's M-A-A-T. You mentioned it, I think, in the first one. That is, looks like a typo of my first name, but no, it's very different. Goddess who represents the concepts of truth, balance, order, harmony, and morality, justice, all that. So couldn't be farther from me, but the A and the T make a big difference. If the answer is yes, if you have lived in accordance with Maat, Congratulations, you are welcomed into the kingdom of Osiris in the afterlife. But if the answer is no, not so good. You are thrown into a soul-eating demon named Amit. I'm sure we'll get to Amit at some point. Just for a visual, picture like the back end of a hippopotamus, the front end of a lion, and the head of a crocodile. So scary stuff all around. So, and it doesn't even happen right away. If you're condemned, you're not just tossed aside. You are subject to some terrifying punishment first before your soul is devoured. Now, this did become an influence on the early Christians as they were working out their own version of hell for the Bibles. They were, they're in the design process, they're storyboarding it all.
Right.
And they borrowed from this. But the big difference is in the Egyptian afterlife, once you were devoured by Amit, that's it.
Yeah.
Game over. I mean, unlike the sort of eternal damnation of Christian hell, you are eliminated. It's over. So in a way, the Egyptian fate for the damned is actually kind of better than the hell we're accustomed to.
Yeah, sure.
And so that in this tradition, that's what passes for good news. Like, you know what? You don't make the cut. Sure, you'll get tortured, eaten by this terrifying triple play of hungry animals. But hey, at least at some point, much like each episode of God versus God, the ordeal does finally end. So, very good sort of postscript. The end of the cult. So Isis and Osiris had a cult together. It was a couple's cult, which makes sense given all they went through together.
Yeah.
When Osiris transitioned to the afterlife, his body was left behind, and his body parts were again dispersed throughout Egypt. So they sort of redistributed him throughout the land. So because of that, there's a lot of temples all throughout the land who claim to have a part of the body. So like there's one town that claims they have his heart, another one, there's several who claim to have a leg or two. I'm not sure how that math works out.
Right.
Sort of an odd sort of franchise model for a gravesite. But the main temple of Isis and Osiris was at Philae. The cult had a very long run, so it was operational until the 450s CE, so well after the imperial decrees that the pagan gods had to go.
Yeah.
Good 50 or 60 years later. So they were the last major temple to close in Egypt, and it's still there. There's still some pretty decent ruins. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's looking pretty good. So if season 2 revenues for God versus God hit our targets, maybe we record our finale there on location.
Nice.
Yeah. So to wrap it all up, to coin a phrase, Osiris was, clearly a very accomplished god king, big leader, was willing to take chances from outlawing cannibalism to culture, agriculture, and for all those fine achievements, really got a pretty raw deal. And then he was killed not once but twice. But thanks to his devoted sister wife Isis and her magic powers, he was also twice reborn, or at least most of him was, except the part that became fish food. But he had a really nice final act in the afterlife, had a hell of a run among worshipers as the last cult standing. And, I'd say if nothing else, he made green skin, an ostrich crown, and a summer mummy linen look pretty damn good.
Yes, he did.
And that is Osiris, or our first contestant.
All right. That very good job. A lot of things we learned. And I think we figured out what that belt was. It's a structural belt, actually. It's not holding.
Yeah, that's right. It's holding together more than the outfit, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's working hard.
Right.
Very good. Well, we will take our break there, and let's see you on the other side for round 2 and get into Tefnut right after the break. All right.
All right, and thank you, Matt. Of course, this episode, as you mentioned, I have Tefnut.
Tefnut.
Now, Tefnut is not a household name, I gather, in contemporary USA, I don't believe. But she is an important, complicated, and interesting primordial goddess from the Egyptian pantheon. And as you mentioned, the grandmother of our first contestant in this episode. So Tefnut was primarily known as the goddess of moisture, which, at first hearing maybe sounds a little bit like an odd sphere of influence for a goddess. But really, this is associated with things like the morning dew, rain, humidity, all which are, nice pantheistic nature deity roles.
Sure.
And I'm not going to get into how the Egyptians claim that Tefnut made fresh, pure water, because, we're all supposed to be drinking more water. And I don't think The rather graphic description of how this is made is going to encourage anybody to be fully hydrated. So
that's quite a tease.
leave that to your imaginations or the Google machine.
Okay.
But every pantheon needs a rain deity, and Tefnut, in addition to this, was also associated with the moon, the sun, and Sirius, which of course was known as the dog star in Greece.
Yep.
And here I'm going to do the picture thing again, asking Matt to describe this artistic rendering of Tefnut, kind of help the audience get a little idea of what she looked like. So.
All right, so I see the image now. It looks like Tefnut has, again, green skin.
Yes.
Not unlike her grandson. So very resplendent in that green skin tone. I'm seeing, looks like a headdress similar to what we talked about in the previous episode with the sort of sun disc wrapped in what looks like a snake. So some sort of sun emblem there. It looks like her face appears to be some sort of wildcat, like a lion of some kind, lioness. I'm guessing.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Has that kind of profile, sort of a prominent snout, if you will, and that's sort of either a hairdo or a headdress kind of coming down in black. I'm seeing a sort of strapless red dress, almost sort of somewhere between a cocktail party and a formal gown. Really, we could be equally comfortable at the SAG Awards or even the Oscars, depending on the accessories.
Yeah, it was very fashionable.
Very nice in red. And she looks like she's holding some sort of staff. Not a whole lot of markings on the staff. Looks pretty straightforward. And then in the left hand appears to be holding an ankh, if I'm not mistaken. So that's all I can see. How did I do?
That is excellent, Matt. You've gotten, I think, all of that correct.
Right.
We also have Shu with her, which is her husband brother in blue. It's got the ostrich feather, so you can kind of see where Osiris gets that. This is from an ancient wall painting in Egypt, where again Tefnut is shown in the green, human body form, and the lion's head, and that sun disk, which is called the uraeus, floating above her head, with the snake around it, again symbolizing the power of the pharaoh. So this painting is actually currently in the Louvre in Paris, should you want to visit. And
I'm sure the French acquired it through completely above board.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure they still have the receipts. And I'm also going to give you some epithets for Tefnut that just to give you an idea of how the Egyptians thought of her. So one epithet was Tefnut the Great, the Honorable One.
Okay.
Also, Goddess from the South.
Oh,
which is nice. And She of Moisture.
Yeah.
She of Moisture. So, and I guess in addition to these sort of more rain types of moisture, she was also associated with spit, which you will recall perhaps from her birth story, which I mentioned in our first episode.
Yes.
And in that story, Tefnut and her brother Shu, who's the god of air, are born after Autumn Ray, the creator god of the sun, in what we'd call Seinfeldian terms, ceases to be master of his domain.
Yes.
And commits the very first act of onanism, and then gestates the twins in his beak. Because, of course, he has the head of a falcon.
Of course. Yes.
Of course, as you'll recall. So eventually, Shu is propelled out of Ra's nose. Tefnut is spit out of his mouth, beak, and that gets to one of the etymologies for Tefnut, is that it is the sound of someone expectorating a good-sized loogie.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The onomatopoeia of the act of spitting. Now, the main etymology, at least in polite circles, is that it means that water. But there's, one more candidate in the etymology, which is from the Egyptian word tefin, as of course you know, would meaning orphan. And that gets to an alternate origin story for Tefnut and Shu, where they, similar to Ra, are actually self-created in the primordial water of the Nun, waiting inert, floating in the water until Ra finally creates that Mount Ben, little strip of land,
right,
where everything starts off. But in either case, the mythology agrees that Tefnut and Shu are the firstborn female and male entities in the universe, and Ra only kind of firmly sets into the male form after his children are born. So as children, Tefnut and Shu were inseparable. They'd play together all the time, often taking the form of lion cubs, in order to play around as playful cubs under the watchful Cyclops eye of their father Ra. And they're such a pair that Tefnut and Shu together had their own pair nickname in ancient Egypt, on par with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez's Benifer.
Right.
Unfortunately, for them, tabloids were still a few millennia off, so we don't get a Shoe Nut or Tef Shoe.
Tef Shoe.
Instead, they were called Rooty, but that is the word for lion cubs. So they're the two were called the Rooties.
Not quite as catchy for like a New York Post headline, but
no. Again, the media has not reached its full development back in those times. Now, again, they're under the watchful eye of their father until they disappeared, and Autumn Ray has to send that single eye to go after them.
Right.
And from Tefnut and Shu's perspective, they're lost in this nothingness the whole time. And at first, it was a fun and play, they're just off on an adventure until they realize that they were lost, and they become afraid, because this is still very, very much the start of creation, and there's no landmarks, there's no mountains, there's no streams,
I guess not,
there's no stars, there's no suns. It's just all kind of the sameness. And so when that eye of Ra finally finds Tefnut and Shu, they're actually grown up by this point.
Oh my.
So either so much time has passed that they have grown up, or the stress of the experience has caused them to mature. And so when they return to Ra, this is when Ra gives Tefnut that extra aspect of being the goddess Mahat. So you mentioned Mahat in the first half of this episode.
Yeah.
And that is actually just another aspect of Tefnut as the goddess of truth. And Shu also gets an aspect as the life giver, as he's already the god of air, so he also becomes the god of breath, of giving breath to people.
That makes sense.
So at this point, creation really just kind of starts to take off. We get the tears of Ra becoming humans, but that's a little bit of a problem, because at this time there's really no Earth. There's just little Mount Ben in a sea of swirly whirly nothingness. So but this is soon rectified, because at the same time, Tefnut and Shu, first female and male entities in the universe, are now adults. And they do what comes naturally to any primordial brother sister pair of gods. Of course. They marry and procreate, the immediate result of this union being two children, Geb or Jeb, the god of the earth, who is going to become the father of Osiris,
right? And
Nut, the goddess of the sky, who will be his mother. And so now everybody has a little bit more breathing space, or at least they would, because there's another problem. It comes up because Nut and Geb are precocious brother sister gods, and their pairing comes even more naturally to them. And so Geb and Nut are immediately locked in an embrace that they will not let go of. So the earth and the sky are just smashed together in a permanent sexual congress.
Oh my goodness, that is, I never thought of it that way. Yeah.
So this is a problem, not because Tefnut and Shu have any sort of anti-incest feelings, obviously.
No. Those have not yet been invented, clearly.
Yes, or other Victorian hang-ups, because we're a long way until the Victorian age. But the embrace between the heavens and the earth is so tight that there is no room for any other life to exist on earth. So it is Shu, the god of air, who's forced to separate Geb the earth and Nut the heavens to allow life on earth to exist. Honestly, Shu is air, Tefnut is moisture. They go between the heavens and the earth, so that it's just really science.
It's the hard science, yeah. As our listeners have become accustomed to on this program, yes.
Yeah. So that's how that started.
Yep.
And so then, we had the rule of Ra on Earth, as well as the rebellion of the humans that was violently put down, as we discussed in our last episode. But now, by some accounts, there's a period where Shu takes the reins as ruler of Egypt, with Tefnut as his queen. But again, after some time, there is again a rebellion, which is something that's going to keep coming up. And this rebellion, according to a temple text that was discovered in the Sinai Peninsula area, the rebellion was led by the sons of Apophis. And you may recall Apophis is that serpent god of chaos that lives in the underworld. So the sons of Apophis opposed Shu, and Shu gathered together all the gods for the defense of Egypt. And then, so this is a four-sided shrine. So just as he's gathering together the gods, it says, go to the next wall. And then that next wall is completely obliterated, and there's no text on it. So we don't know what happens.
Oh, man.
We just
cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's a cliffhanger. Other than, so the whole battle scene is wiped out, but then it picks up after the battle, and Shu is victorious.
Okay, so there's like a missing third reel of the film, and you pick up the conclusion. All right,
and they cut that for costs. But Shu has been victorious, but apparently this has been a big battle that we missed, because this effort has cost him, and Shu has to retreat to the heavens in order to recover. And so Tefnut stays behind to rule Egypt herself, much like her granddaughter will later. Right. But there is a problem here. Geb, her son, god of the earth, has been waiting for this day ever since he has been separated by his father from his wife, Nut. He's been looking to take his revenge.
Sure.
So Geb seizes the palace, seizes his mother by force, takes the throne, and locks Tefnut in the palace with him for 9 days as a storm rages outside, brought about by Tefnut and her rage.
Yikes.
So, there's little snippets and different versions of what happens next in these different texts, but apparently Geb tries to put on that uraeus, that sun symbol of the pharaoh himself, that floating sun crown, but it burns his head, and he is horribly injured by it, and has to take it off. And then his father Shu has finally recovered. Geb is turned into a boar as punishment.
Ooh.
And Shu comes down from the heavens and stabs Geb in the thigh with a spear.
My goodness.
So violent ending to that.
I should say so.
So then cut to the next scene. This leads to the myth of the distant goddess, or the returning goddess, which is a very popular motif in Egyptian religion, and gets told about a few different goddesses. However, the most common and sort of paradigmatic version is with Tefnut. And so the basic motif here is there's a goddess who gets angered and leaves Egypt in response, and needs to be lured back with offerings and purification. So her return can then be celebrated. And this is actually a perfect myth for Tefnut for a couple reasons. She is the goddess of moisture, of course, in a desert land. Egypt, of course, suffered the occasional drought or insufficient flooding of the Nile.
Yeah.
She's also the goddess of divine truth and justice. So withdrawal of truth and justice is also seen, of course, as quite threatening.
Sure.
And something that the Egyptians would have perceived to have happened at certain different points. So, and as we have heard, she may have had ample reason to be angry and withdraw. So Tefnut is angered with her father Ra, either at his failure to defend her from the assault by Geb, or in other versions, Tefnut is actually jealous of the veneration that is being given to the new generation of gods. So we had the first instance of blasting the kids today in history.
Yes. To be followed by many more,
Many more, the first of many,
including very much from this very microphone. Yes.
right. So because she views Set as basically evil, she views Nephthys as kind of useless, and to be honest, she thinks Cyrus is a little bit of a simp.
Yeah.
And his wife Isis actually is the only one that she sees as useful among that generation. However, Isis has adopted the epithet the Sweet One, which Tefnut, as the goddess of pure water, believes should be reserved for herself.
Oh.
So Tefnut gives Ra a bit of an earful, and leaves Egypt, going south to Nubia, taking moisture with her, causing a drought in Egypt and flooding in Nubia, and then taking Mahat with her, inviting chaos into Egypt, and perhaps initiating the plot of the 1997 hit Jim Carrey vehicle Liar Liar in Nubia.
Classic. Yeah.
No one can tell a lie. I'm not sure. But Ra is also down one of his protective Eye of Ra goddesses, because she is one of those Ra's angels that will sometimes act as the Eye of Ra. So
he's shorthanded at this point if she's overseas. Yeah.
So he knows he's got to act. And by act, I mean delegate to someone else to do something.
As is his style.
Yes. He's got the bark. He's got to be the sun.
Yeah.
His day is full. So in this case, it is Shu, Tefnut's husband, and Thoth, the god of wisdom, that he sends out. And I should mention here that Tefnut, in her rage, has gone full lioness mode. And in fact, in many versions, she is a fire-breathing lioness at this point. So in order to approach her stealthily, Shu also goes into lion mode, and Thoth goes into baboon form, because she is pledged to attack any men or gods who try and approach her.
Okay.
So that way, they can maybe get a little closer before they arouse any suspicion.
Right.
So Thoth and Shu go into search mode. They split up, looking for Tefnut to try and convince her to return to Egypt and bring her attributes back with her. And it is actually Thoth that finds Tefnut first. So she's in lioness form, so he uses his soothing, good kitty voice. One assumes, because in this state she's not really herself. This is kind of a Hulk type situation. She's a little irrational because she's so full of rage. But she recognizes Thoth is not an actual baboon, and it's the god of wisdom, and begins to attack. But Thoth warns her that fate will punish any crime she does, and it's enough. She's rational enough for that to give her some second thoughts, because even a goddess doesn't want to mess with the fates, as we've learned.
Oh yeah.
So there's a little back and forth where she transforms into different animals. She tries to get away. He chases after her. Eventually, they kind of tire out, and Thoth begins to tell her stories about the beauty of Egypt and fables of the strong and the weak allying, including, and I thought this was interesting, the tale of the mouse who saves the lion, and that is where that fable actually comes from, this myth. So he promises her that shrines will be built for her, festivals will be held, parades will be held, if she'll just come back to Egypt. And she's not convinced initially, at least. Thoth has to ask her 1,077 times.
Again, many large specific numbers.
Very specific number. Yes. And she's still not happy about the epithet thing. So Thoth gives her a new epithet. He says, okay, fine. We'll call you the honorable one. How's that work? And that she likes it. So brings her around a little bit. And then so Thoth asks her to swear by Shu that she will return. And she says, make me swear by Ra, if you must make me swear. And Thoth says, I know you will not violate an oath by Shu, implying that she would violate one to Ra, but not Thoth. So she's convinced to take a bath in a sacred lake, and is transformed back from a lion into her beautiful woman form. Well, a beautiful woman with a lion head.
Right. And the red cocktail dress. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally Shu shows up. He turns on the charm, and the two fire up the old sistrum, that special ancient Egyptian sex rattle.
Yes.
And enjoy a little bit of a passionate reunion, as you can imagine.
How can you resist when you hear that sound?
All right. Then they head back to Egypt and are greeted joyously by the people with parades and offerings and festivals. Finally, there's some sort of reconciliation and purification of Geb that goes along with this, as part of the restoration of Mahat, the divine order and truth. And then there's this temple featuring Tefnut in lion-headed form in Nubia, actually. And it says, Shu, the son of Ra, rejoices with Geb as Tefnut with her daughter Nut. They are in joy here, eternally, having put an end to rebellion and expelled calamity. So everybody's back, one big happy family.
Yep.
And that is the story of Tefnut, goddess of moisture, lunar goddess, solar goddess, goddess of divine truth.
That would pass for a happy ending. The lion has her the cubs, and all is right with the world.
Yeah, and their family goes on to live happily forever with no internal family
right
strife.
and if the generations to come just stuck to their roles, and everything worked out just fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating. That's quite a journey. Yeah, I like it.
Right.
And came back home. They say you can't go home again, but she pulled it off, got it done. Outstanding. Great. Well, we'll sit with that for a moment, process, and enjoy a little bit of some moisture for our vocal cords, and let us get back to our 5 categories right on the other side of this break.
All right. All right, and we are back. So we are here with our 5 rounds to determine which of these gods is going to go on and get a chance at the ultimate comeback.
Yes.
And so our first round, as always, is immortal combat, which is simply who would win in a physical confrontation between these two deities. And I'll go first, kind of giving the rundown on Tefnut. So Tefnut, I think her big claim to combat strength is that she is one of those members of Ra's angels. She could become the Eye of Ra, the fighting combat enforcer of the great sun god. So obvious problem with that is she's not totally acting of her own will in this, but on the will of Ra. And though the Eye maintains some free will in that form, the way in which the Eye form is granted is, I have to believe, has some sort of confirmation by Ra to grant that power.
Sure. Got to sign off on that. Yeah, there's parameters for sure.
Yeah. There's forms to fill out. There's something,
papyrus bureaucracy. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but of course, she also has her ability to go full lioness mode.
Yeah, that's not small.
With fire breathing capabilities. Like I said, that form is a little bit of a Incredible Hulk vibe. And that, yes, she's very physically powerful, but she's also a little bit out of control when she's in that form. And from the distant goddess, even the power of her voice was fierce. So via the Lady of the Water and Flame hymns to Tefnut, which is a book that is out there, it says, she let out a piercing roar with the power of her voice, and then the desert opened its mouth, and stone spoke with the sand, and the mountain shook for 2 hours, and the mountains became black, and the sun darkened at noon. So she can cause earthquakes, she can cause solar eclipses just with a roar.
Wow.
So obviously pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But she's also, as we saw, obviously susceptible to a smooth talking baboon.
Yeah.
But who among us is not?
I was gonna say I could fall victim to that pretty easily too. That's, yeah.
And she had one more form that I haven't mentioned. She apparently is sometimes depicted as a snake with a lion's head.
Oh,
I don't know what points that wins. I mean, obviously it's scary looking.
yes.
I feel like the head maybe is a little out of proportion. So it wouldn't be the greatest fighting
couldn't move,
form.
couldn't slither quite as
No,
dynamically.
but it certainly has a fear factor.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. All right.
Pretty strong case there. Yeah, with Osiris, it really depends on the version of him that you get in the fight, because of course in his prime, he's got these divine abilities of wisdom. He's a great ruler. We don't hear any stories about him conquering because his reign was a very peaceful one. So he's doing public works projects. He's doing arts and culture, and he's improving the dietary habit of his people. Yeah. So all, I think, pretty good, strong attributes for an official, for a leader. I don't know how much that helps you in a fight.
No.
And that's the previous version. Now, I will say as a footnote, for a guy who was renowned for having such wisdom, maybe you should have thought twice before getting into that coffin.
Exactly.
Let's throw that out there. But if you get him after that event, he's going to be something of a shell of his former self. Man, he's been through a lot. He's been reanimated. He's been cut up and re-put together again. So even after, at this point, thousands of years after living in the sort of spa that is the kingdom in the afterlife, I can't imagine even that would fully heal the effect of being having to go through that kind of trauma.
Well, yeah, still wearing the mummified bandages, indicates that might be structural. That's necessary.
That's right. I mean, and Isis has some pretty amazing magical powers, but clearly it's still holding all that in. So either that is just purely a fashion statement once he goes to the afterlife, or there's something there. So I think in terms of pure immortal combat, as wise and as handsome and as fashionable as Osiris is, I think he does not fare terribly well in this category. So I think given the sort of ability to rage, given the really incredible powers of voice, and willingness to act on her hunches, sure, the Eye of Ra thing was probably more regulated, but when it came time for her to leave town to head to Nubia, she was on it. She had the ambition. So I give Tefnut my vote in this one.
Yeah, and I think even if those bandages aren't structural, I think his fashion choices are just restrictive of his movement and his ability to fight.
That's true. You're not going to get your full range of motion if you're even with a half mummy, the summer mummy. So
you're kind of fighting with two hands tied in front of your body. So
you kind of have the little weed thresher to kind of try to wave at your enemy, but I don't think it's going to get you too far against a lioness or a
fire-breathing lioness. No
snake body. Yeah, no. I think this is over real fast.
I feel like this is Tefnut's round for sure.
I mean, not a lot of stories in which people get their ass kicked by their own grandmothers, but I think this is one of them.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right. So we have a 1-0 good start for Tefnut, and that moves us on to curriculum deity, which is again, which god would you rather be? Which god would you rather worship? And who has that certain it factor? I'll let you start.
Yeah. So, in terms of who would rather be, again, there's a difference. There's a tale of two Osirises here. The front end, highly regarded during his reign, very well respected, well liked by almost everybody, apart from the 72 goons that his brother had to roust up to help overthrow him. So he's very much beloved by his people, as a very dedicated spouse, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Even if his overall family situation was, we'll say, a little sticky, but the core of his family was very strong. He also, similar to Tefnut, had some really great nicknames. So because he was associated with the cycles of renewal in nature and the vegetation, the flooding of the Nile, Osiris was called he who is permanently benign and youthful.
Oh, nice.
And, as somebody who had a milestone birthday recently, I can tell you as the years go by, I'm becoming less benign and less youthful by the day. So that sounds like a nice thing to be. That would be very pleasant. The other nickname he had, the one who continues to be perfect.
Nice.
Which, again, not a terribly good fit for me, perhaps not even for you, but so good nicknames, pretty good early round, but in the end, all that drama, the coffin, the dismemberment, I don't think I would aspire to live that life. It started well, and in fact, arguably ended well with his role in the afterlife, but that part in the middle is it's a lot to get past. In terms of worship, so there were, you wouldn't be surprised that the fertility rites were represented in his big story, the sort of death and resurrection, in festivals that were part of his worship. So big 2-day festival. They would construct this, what they called an Osiris bed, which resembled his infamous coffin. They would fill it with soil and seed. As that would grow, it would symbolize rebirth. They would then, the festival goers would perform a play that dramatized his murder and dismemberment and the search for his body. So they brought all that back to life.
Nice.
Now, as you can imagine, kind of a downer of a party. Plutarch described it as gloomy, solemn, and mournful. And a little bit later, according to the 4th century Roman Latin historian Julius Firmicus Maternus, it's about as Roman Latin name as you can get.
Yeah.
He said that worshipers beat their breasts and gnashed their shoulders. So a real bummer for opening act of the festival. But like the story itself, the ritual ends on a higher note. It depicts Osiris's triumphant return. As Julius Firmicus Maternus said, when the people pretend that the mutilated remains of the god have been found and rejoined, they turn from mourning to rejoicing. So it sounds like from that point of the party, it gets much more enjoyable. There's some weird kind of esoteric things happening inside the temple throughout all this, where they're making these wheat paste models of each body part that was dismembered in Osiris.
Oh, nice.
They put them into a mold. They then bury him for a few days. They make this sort of divine bread, and they place it as a silver chest, as an offering to the head of the statue. I guess all this follows the Book of the Dead very clearly, but there's no word on sort of whether the dismembered body bread is like eaten afterward. Is it given, do they make a bread phallus? Is that part of it too? Do they throw that to the fishes? Do they raffle it off? A lot of open questions on that. So, pretty decent festival, pretty lively, has its downsides, has its upsides, but in terms of worshiping, good points for that, and good points for as I said, the longevity of the cult, which remained going up until the bitter end in the 450s. So pretty strong case for worship, less of a strong case for who you'd want to be.
Yeah, that interesting. So, being Tefnut is also complicated. I think the center of her life and most stable, positive relationship she has is obviously with her twin brother and husband Shu. They are separated from time to time, but it's clear that they belong together and they always work hard to get back together. Have a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde vibe, both with the Eye of Ra thing and that lioness form. It's not 100% how much control she has over that transformation, which I think is a bit of a problem. Like in that story, she's arguing with Ra, and it sort of like just becomes so enraged that she transforms and has to flee Egypt. So at least that's one way to read it. And I didn't really mention it in her section, but as a primordial deity, eventually Tefnut does retire from the earth, and she joins Ra on that solar bark. Both her and Shu go along for the solar bark ride.
So they're the fellow commuters in the journey of the sun every day in their retirement.
Yes, but on both up in the sky, at least the sky part of it, Tefnut and Shu are always depicted in that part. In terms of worship, Tefnut was usually worshipped together with Shu. That couple cult centers focused in a couple cities on them. Chief among them is the town Leontopolis, which is the Greek name for the town, literally meaning town of the lions, because they were the lion deities. And Heliopolis, which was the center of Ra worship, also had some Tefnut worship going on. So there were 3 types of worship that I found for a Tefnut devotee. In Heliopolis, there was mainly as part of the Aeneid, which is the collection of the 9 main Egyptian gods, sort of like Egyptian Olympians, but they had 9 of them. Then there were festivals dedicated to Tefnut that celebrated her return as part of that distant goddess. Not a large amount of detail there, but there were large community seasonal festivals and parades with a beer garden and such. Sure. And then there were also these remote shrines all around the edge of Egypt that were kind of like outposts dedicated to return, or maybe outposts on the lookout for her leaving in case she needed to be brought back.
Sure.
so it wouldn't take so long. And then I found some offerings that were suggested for Tefnut online. Water,
Naturally, yeah.
lion figures, green moss agate, which I guess is a stone, sapphires, sea salt, a pear, and blue topaz. So those are things that if you're into Tefnut, those are things you want to give. So kind of an interesting one as well here. So yeah, I don't know.
Not nearly as exotic as a bunch of like bread body parts, but
no,
it's a little fancier, but I like it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You have that attack by Geb, and then in the middle, also not great, given that is her son.
Yeah.
So this is a tough one.
Yeah, no easy answer on this one. I as entertaining as the worship part of it is, I think the torture of being Osiris makes it a less appealing option. That even with some of the things that Tefnut had to go through, I think she still gets the better life to live if you have that choice.
Right. Well, I think it's my vote. Yeah. So I think it's interesting, like how one weighs. I really think about that afterlife part down there. Is he just barely holding it together as sort of semi-zombie, or is he more of a regal Hades in a nicer neighborhood?
Yeah, I feel like because he's got the 42 judges doing all the work, I feel like he's really much more of a figurehead. And the fact that he was forced to take that job because he couldn't take his old one suggests to me it's we're like a professor emeritus who sort of still keeps a little office in the corner, but doesn't really do much. Yeah.
All right. Well, interesting. I think I'm going to join you with Tefnut.
Yeah.
So Tefnut's got Tefnut has got 2-0.
Yeah. Good start.
Good start for her. But we are now headed into our third round, which is Good God. And that is simply who has the better character. So I'll go first on this one. And, not a huge amount to go on here for Tefnut. But I think if we start off with the service that the deity provided, obviously moisture is a big one.
Yeah.
All
big
life
fan.
on Earth is only possible with that. So that's a good. She didn't do a lot to make it happen. It just sort of came out of her. But then there's her side gig as Mahat, who was the goddess of truth and divine order.
Mm-hmm.
Besides being sort of a symbolic representation, she's a spokesperson for truth. And the only thing else I could find is that she provided the feather that was used for weighing against an individual soul. So when someone died, their life would be weighed against a feather.
Yes.
So, important duty there. She's sort of like the head of afterlife weights and measures. make sure that the feather was the proper weights for weighing of souls.
I mean, that is a unusually bureaucratic role, but why not? Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, someone does have to do it, and apparently she did it well.
Yeah.
Okay. So the main mythology about Tefnut is that returning goddess mythology, where her absence causes drought and chaos in Egypt. And our longest time listeners may recall that we dinged Demeter in season 1 for threatening the world with starvation if her daughter Persephone was not returned.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is a little different in that it seems more like it was an instinctive emotional response to storm off. So it's not as though she was particularly holding people hostage, or at least it doesn't 100% seem like
that. Right. Demeter was very much a bargaining chip. It was was in order to secure leverage, whereas in this case, that's right. There were emotional factors involved first and foremost. I think you're right.
Yeah, but and having this Hulk side is something to consider with her character. She has a little bit of a side to her that is a little more out of control and rageful. So
yeah, I think the pretty strong points for Osiris in terms of character. I mean, you've got in his reign, you've got that being synonymous with truth, justice, and peace, always doing his best for his subjects. even in potential missteps where he had that affair with the other sister, he had a pretty good defense of, well, she was in disguise as my real sister.
That's
the only dark side, I think, and of course he's rather hapless and just doing his best to keep himself together in the middle part of his life. But in the afterlife, it was a pretty brutal place. And you have this sort of, if you didn't do well, you've got that brutal end and having your soul fed to Amit. So assuming you're not a fan of being annihilated by a hippo, lion, crocodile, soul-eating thing, not a rough place to be. That said, based on your comment before, it's not clear whether Osiris was really doing much to pull the strings, or if that was just the system he was sort of overseeing in more of a benign way. So I give Osiris a lot of credit, going through a lot, maintaining that sense of values, having, where he loses some potency in Immortal Combat for not really having the experience in fighting and conquering.
Right.
The good part of that is because he was a peaceful ruler and had a very good reign. So I think character-wise, I do think he gets the edge for me in this category.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think getting rid of cannibalism,
yeah, I mean, hard to argue with that. That's
that's going in the win, going in the win column. So
that's right.
I'm gonna go with you. So that brings us to 2-1.
Okay.
Tefnut's still in the lead, but 2 more categories left.
Yeah.
The next one is iconography, and I'll let you take this one. This is who has the better legacy, who's more influential.
Yes, and pretty strong case for Osiris here, at least in terms, we know these Egyptian gods don't have not quite as much of the cultural cachet as some of the Greco-Roman figures, but Osiris turns out pretty well. But of course, first and foremost, setting the tone for the fashion statement of being a mummy is really got to be the lead headline here. The first to dress in that fine Egyptian linen that we're so familiar with now. So, Andrew, next time you're out gallivanting by the shore in Martha's Vineyard for the summer, wearing your best linens, you'll have Osiris to thank for that. We talked about the trend setting in terms of the pharaoh beard, fake beards. Osiris was very much behind that all the way through to Lincoln Park. Name wise, he's got a connection to some of the typical astronomy stuff. He's got an asteroid named after him. There's a lunar crater. There's also a planet called Osiris. Now, it is an extrasolar planet, so it's not in our astronomical neighborhood. But it was discovered recently, 1999. It has an atmosphere that's got familiar things: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen. It's also very big. It is 200 times the size of our Earth, so plenty of room on Osiris, the planet. And at the same time, it's 159 light years from here, so it's unlikely that either of us will be visiting anytime soon. It's pretty far away. And we can all agree, though, Osiris is a much cooler name than its original designation for the planet, HD 209458b. So definitely a step up.
Yeah.
Also, the name Osiris is the name of an optical spectrometer in Spain. So it's an instrument to measure light as part of this big telescope program they have there. The full name is Optical System for Imaging and Low Resolution Integrated Spectroscopy. So Osiris is actually an acronym. They found a way to make it. So the name is acronym. Now, I don't know how that works in Spanish, but it's still pretty impressive. So that's pretty good. Less impressive is the character of Osiris in the DC comics. Now, we're going to talk about a minor character. Osiris is the brother-in-law of Black Adam. That is talk about low grade. I mean, I'm not sure that even gets you invited to like Superman's birthday party, or like if Batman has a backyard barbecue. I don't even know if you're on the guest list. So very much a low player in the DC comic universe. We do have a heavy metal band from not too far from here, Palatine, Illinois, called Born of Osiris. Checked out a couple of their songs. Not really my style, but very, very metal, very hard. Osiris is also the name of an unincorporated community in Cedar County, Missouri. Now, according to the website Wikipedia, here is the extent of the history of this unincorporated county, and I am quoting. A post office called Osiris was established there in 1901 and remained in operation until 1906. That's it. That's the history. So not much of a legacy there. No. So we once had a post office like 100 years ago and lasted for 5 years. So not exactly befitting the stellar reputation of the Show Me State, but there it is. There's Osiris in Missouri. So a fairly broad range of cultural influences from big to small, but not a bad showing, I'd say.
Yeah, not bad. So this one, I'm being honest, this was a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
Tefnut's a little on the obscure side.
Yes.
Here in the modern.
I've been very much looking forward to this category to see what you would find.
survey. So, there's, we may talk about the pharaoh Akhenaten at some point. He was a Middle Kingdom pharaoh, famous or infamous for rejecting all of the other Egyptian gods other than Aten. But his wife Nefertiti, there's a famous bust, and if you think you haven't seen it, you Google it, say Queen Nefertiti bust, you'll recognize it.
Yeah.
But she is being depicted, some believe, as Tefnut. In that. So even though no one knows it, other than
but we
few
know
Egyptian Egyptologists, and it is contested among them, it's something.
So between you, me, and our millions of listeners, now others will know.
Yes, now they'll know. So there is the Tefnut Ice Lolly, and this is a Swedish sour beer that is described as tasting like pineapple smoothie with salt and vanilla.
Huh.
So there is a Tefnut Appliances in New Delhi, India.
Okay. Great.
There is a holding company in the Cayman Islands called Tefnut.
Yeah. That sounds, again, totally above board.
Yeah, totally above board. I couldn't even find a crypto for it. So Moritz Grossman makes Tefnut men's luxury watch that, quote, reflects a decidedly reduced form vocabulary and straightforward development process.
Okay. I've been kind of getting into watches lately, so I'll have to look into that. Yeah.
Yeah. A reduced form vocabulary for the watch. So the watch doesn't say much.
Doesn't say much. Yeah.
And then, so she appears as a character in some of the will become the usual suspects for this season, in the Moon Knight and the Gods of Egypt. But sadly, I could not find any YA fiction or romance novels around Tefnut. Nor could I find any holsters. So.
Oh, well, our fans will be very disappointed to find that. Or it just represents a market opportunity for some enterprising author or holster manufacturer.
Yeah, so there you have it.
As impressive as your research was, I think pound for pound, I think Osiris has to win the category on this one from my view. Although I will say that Swedish sour beer does not sound that bad. I would give it a try.
No. I was hoping it would. When I realized it was in Sweden, but I think that it is emblematic that we had to go all the way to Sweden, India, and the Cayman Islands to find anything. So I think I'm gonna.
Yeah, if my wife came home in the kitchen and there was a Tefnut appliance from New Delhi, I'm not sure I'd be thrilled with that. A bottle of that Swedish sour in the fridge, much better. But
yeah. So I believe it's just a appliance repair company.
Oh, not even the appliance manufacturer. Okay, even better.
I think so. Maybe you'll send them out there. But no, I'm going to go with Osiris on this one.
So that brings us to 2-2. We have
2-2, and it all comes down to deadlock. As it should. Matinee Idol.
Yes.
Or let me say it properly. Matinee Idol. Where we have our own versions of movies or limited series and decide which god would make the better movie or limited series, and therefore which one gets to move on to have a chance to come back and help save us all.
Yes.
So I'll go first on this one, and there were a couple of different ways I thought about going here. That relationship with her brother husband Shu obviously is pretty central to her story. So I thought of sort of a Blue Lagoon meets Flowers in the Attic sort of story. But there's some cringe to that. So
yeah,
in both directions. So again, I'm going to go with the more adventurous part of the story, and that is that returning goddess part. So in this, Princess Tefnut has always been the perfect sweet daughter, princess, betrothed, girlfriend to Prince Shu, who she loves. But she also has a secret rageful side that she has channeled into being the defender of the realm as a warrior assassin. So her father, the king, has taken for granted both these capacities and slighted her in various ways. And in addition, living that double life has meant that she's had to conceal, not feel, full rage, emotions form. So, of course, at a high pressure formal ball, she finally cracks, lashes out at the king, sprays fire out of her mouth, burning down a whole wing of the castle, and then flees into the night, perhaps singing a song. The king realizes, he's lost his fiercest warrior as well as his daughter, and it soon becomes apparent that without the princess, the kingdom is cursed to an eternal summer drought. So he sends Shu out to find her, along with his wisest advisor, who happens to be a baboon. They have some comic adventures along the way looking for her. We also cut to Princess Tefnut having her own violent scrapes, sort of a Dark Knight style against some brigands, ne'er-do-wells, followed by a constant driving storm. Finally coming together where the disguised prince and wise man have to defend themselves from the princess while convincing her to return to the kingdom, which she does just in time to save the king from a dragon named Apophis or something.
Or something.
And then a couple songs and everyone lives happily ever after. So of course you may have guessed that I'm thinking of this in more of a Disney style animation.
Yeah, the couple of songs here and there, it seemed a little bit discordant with the tone of the Dark Knight, but now it's starting to come together.
Yeah. So and that's what I have. And then as the voice of Tefnut, I had Lily Reinhart, star of Riverdale, along with Cole Sprouse, also star of Riverdale, as Shu.
I always admire that your casting choices are much more current and present day than mine. Well done. Yeah, I was hoping that the baboon advisor would borrow a little bit of comic relief from the kind of every which way but loose canon, but I suppose that was a chimpanzee. But
yeah,
they're actors. They can.
It could be. I know, and I went back. It could be done live action. I at Disney these days they do them both.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, wait 20 years, let Jon Favreau whip it up in live action. It's fine.
Yeah,
very good. Well, for Osiris, we've worked through in the now 17 installments of this program over the course of time. We worked through a lot of genres in this category: rom-coms, musicals, thrillers, detective stories. Given the extreme weirdness of the Osiris story, I wanted to explore something we haven't done, kind of an experimental film, kind of some art house fare. So it really hones in on the second death of Osiris, where of course memorably his 14 body parts are scattered throughout the land. So in this film, we follow his devoted wife Isis as she goes on the hunt, going door to door throughout the land to recover those body parts and piece her husband back together. So each segment kind of is almost like a little short film connected throughout, where she finds a body part in question, but has to persuade the keeper of the body part to give it up, which is more difficult than you might think. The problem is these are body parts of a god, and so they have special abilities even on their own. And because they're all green, everybody knows, all right, this is a special body part that we can do something with. So we follow each of these body parts through the stories of where they've landed and how they've made a real difference in the communities where they've wound up. So, for instance, Osiris's left hand, it turns out, is able to play the sistrum, that rattle-like instrument that the ancient Egyptians found so stimulating. Not only play it, but play it at a virtuoso level. And this is like the yo-yo ma of the sistrum, just the left hand. And it never tires because it's a god. So it just plays this rattle, this erotic rattle 24/7. So you can imagine the small town that came upon it is enjoying this whole different level of sustained romantic passion they've never felt before and not willing to give that up easily. So it's a tough sell. I mean, come on, listen to that sound. Who can resist 24/7? In another segment, the right leg of Osiris is discovered in a different town, and it's learned that it can play soccer at the level of like the best, Ronaldo, Pele, Messi. Like it is a soccer prodigy on its own, just the leg. So we then follow this local team, from kind of down in its luck. It's a lovable loser reputation, but they're about to turn it upside down because they have this leg on the team, and they're going to make a run for, I don't know, the Egypt Cup or whatever. And I'm assuming that there must have been some kind of version of soccer back then.
Sure.
Presumably they were using the head of a goat for the ball. So we'll call it goat ball. So this ragtag bunch of goat ballers is not going to let go of that leg anytime soon. So again, it's going to be a tough sell. It won't be an easy get for Isis. So throughout, she starts by playing nice, as is very much in her character. But because it gets harder and harder to extract these body parts, she has to start using her divine magic. Really has to start playing dirty, extract them by force. And each chapter, she just gets darker and darker. We watch her break bad in the process, turning from our lovable, plucky heroine to sort of an anti-heroine by the end. Now, she is a god. She has black magic, manages to do it, of course. And at the very end, she's able to piece back Osiris back together through this combination of magic and, of course, mummification. We get a really nice cinematic climax. We get, physical and emotional release, some special effects probably. But, of course, there's a loose end. And here's where it gets real artsy. We'll recall that the royal unit was not recovered in the story because it was, of course, thrown into the Nile to be eaten by a fish. Well, in the final segment of the film, there's one fish swimming in the right place at the right time in the Nile. He spots this green phallus that comes into the river, takes it for, a sea cucumber or like a large piece of plankton, whatever, chomps it right up. But like the other body parts in the beginning of the film, this too comes with divine powers. So this lucky fish, by eating the phallus, ends up gaining super strength and speed, transforms into a great white shark who's also immortal. And remember, sharks have to keep moving. So this thing is going to move endlessly to try to make itself alive, maintain its immortality. So we follow the shark in montage over decades, and it's hundreds of years, then thousands of years, as it continues to venture forth in search of new waters. Then one day at the very end, the shark gets close to land once more, and through his divine sense of smell, he detects something he hasn't experienced in millennia. Yes, it's the scent of fine Egyptian linen. So he pokes up his head. We pull back to reveal he has landed in Martha's Vineyard, 1975, full of tourists and salty boatmen dressed in their summer linens. And we realize this whole film, our entire journey over thousands of years, has all been a prequel to Jaws. And we cut to black. And that is Pieces of Me coming to a theater near you. Now, I'm picturing as Isis, who really is kind of the main character of this. Gal Gadot, of course, she's Israeli, but kind of brings a certain sort of Middle Eastern flair. We know from her performance as Wonder Woman, she can be both very charming, but also kick ass if she needs to. Obviously, as Osiris, it's a minor role because it really is just about the body parts coming together for that climactic scene. Certainly something Paul Giamatti, I think, could accomplish really well. He's not Middle Eastern, but he will be in full green face, so I think he can still pull it off totally fine. And obviously, as a young Jaws, and we see that final journey at the end, who else but an AI-generated version as the voice actor of he who could voice animals and beasts like no other, the late, great Gilbert Gottfried, who in the final line, "Do I smell Egyptian linen?" Of course he does. And that is Pieces of Me. Yeah.
Interesting. I thought you were going to go with that as a limited series because you have sort of body part of the week.
That could very much work. Yeah.
Each town you go, it's a 14 episode series. Which ends in that Jaws, body part of the week, go to a different town.
Yeah, sort of like a Columbo kind of thing where yeah. I think that could work too. We'll leave that as part of the development deal when we pitch it to the networks.
Right. So, all right. This is a tough one. So, I think I'm gonna go with Osiris on this one. I think that art house feel is interesting enough to go with that one. There maybe was a little bit derivative about my version of Tefnut.
I mean, it's a Disney style animation. You've got to stick to the genre to some extent.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think I will join you. I think not just because it really does tell an unusual and epic journey, but it's people love prequels. People like rebooting IP, and if there's nothing that Hollywood won't love more than another Jaws installment. So yeah, I think I join you on that. I think Osiris takes the cake in a razor sharp finish. Then
razor sharp finish and an incredible comeback down 0-2.
Yeah.
To come back and win 3-2.
Win the Golden Ale.
That is right. That is right.
For season 2, not the Golden Apple anymore. Very good. Well, what a long, strange trip this has been, Andrew. Once again, proving ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, they can't touch this. This is just good old-fashioned human ingenuity and storytelling at its finest.
And it's finest,
spanning
thousands of years,
millennia. Yes. Very good. Well done. As always, of course, our thanks to Andy Snow for the theme song. As always, we refer you to our Spotify playlist, where each week or each installment we add a couple new songs that relate back to the episode, and look for that. And of course, as always, like, subscribe, tell your friends, leave a positive review.
Yeah. I've been told that word of mouth is really the lifeblood of independent podcasters.
I think that is hard to argue with. Yes.
So don't just tell a friend about it. Tell them to listen to it. Hold them down if you need to.
Yes. If you have the strength to hold down this other person for at least 90 minutes straight, strongly encouraged. Yes. All right. Well, we'll be back with episode 3 in short order. But thank you, everybody, for listening. Andrew, always a joy, always a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, folks. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.